Supreme War Hierarch Vexthul raised his six-armed form from the command throne, mandibles clicking in what passed for laughter among the Kethmori. Through the crystalline viewing port of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, he gazed upon humanity's last desperate act, a single battered vessel limping toward his armada of 10,000 ships. The craft looked like scrap metal held together by prayers and stubbornness. The bridge fell silent, except for the rhythmic hum of quantum processors calculating targeting solutions. Vexthul's primary eyes focused on the human vessel, while his secondary optics monitored the reactions of his subordinates. War Commander Krilnas shifted nervously at his station, his chitinous exoskeleton betraying uncertainty through barely perceptible color changes. Hierarch, Krilnas ventured, his voice a subsonic rumble that vibrated through the deck plating. Our sensors detect anomalous energy signatures from the human craft. Perhaps we should what? Vexthul's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound like breaking glass mixed with the screech of rending metal. Deploy our full might against a single ship? You speak like a hatchling, Krilnas. This is humanity's final desperate gambit, a theatrical gesture before inevitable extinction. The human vessel, designated as the Vindication by Intercepted Communications, continued its approach. Its hull bore the scars of countless battles, plasma burns, kinetic impact craters, and makeshift repairs that spoke of a species unwilling to surrender. Vexthul had studied the humans during their 3-decade war, finding them curious but ultimately inferior. They possessed neither the Kethmori's natural armor nor their technological superiority. Yet they persisted with an almost pathological determination. Status report on the human homeworld, Vexthul commanded, his attention splitting between the approaching ship and the tactical displays surrounding his throne. Orbital bombardment proceeding as scheduled, reported Tactical Prime Yithkar, her voice carrying the satisfaction of impending victory. All major population centers are ablaze. Estimated human casualties exceed 12 billion. Resistance has collapsed on all fronts except for this singular vessel. Vexthul's mandibles clicked again, faster now, betraying excitement. The humans had proven surprisingly resilient, lasting far longer than initial projections suggested. The Altarian Collective had fallen within months, the Vegan Confederacy in mere weeks, but humanity had fought for 32 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Their stubbornness had actually impressed him. Hierarch, Communications Adept. Zermoth interrupted. We're receiving a transmission from the human vessel. They're requesting parley. The bridge erupted in what passed for laughter among the Kethmori, a cacophony of clicking, chittering, and subsonic growls. Vexthul raised a primary hand, and silence returned instantly. Put it through, he commanded, genuine curiosity overriding. Protocol. Let us hear what their final words will be. The main display shimmered, revealing the bridge of the human ship. A figure stood in the center, Captain Lysander Kerrigan, according to intelligence files. The human looked exhausted, his uniform torn and blood-stained, but his eyes held something that made Vexthul pause. Not desperation, but cold calculation. I am Captain Kerrigan of the Terran Defense Force vessel Vindication, the human said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. I'm here to discuss terms. Vexthul leaned forward, amused. Terms. You command a single ship against 10,000. Your world burns, your fleets are scattered atoms, your colonies are ash. What terms could you possibly offer? Kerrigan's expression didn't change. The terms of your surrender. The bridge fell dead silent. Vexthul's secondary eyes widened while his primary ones remained fixed on the human. After a moment that stretched like an eternity, he began to laugh, deep, resonant sounds that made the hull vibrate. Magnificent, he roared. Even facing extinction, you maintain your species' legendary arrogance. Very well, human. You have provided us with entertainment. As a reward, I shall grant you a warrior's death rather than simply vaporizing your ship from range. He gestured to his weapons coordinator. Bring us to optimal firing distance. Let them see the futility of their defiance up close. As the Kethmori armada adjusted its formation, Vexthul noticed something peculiar. The human ship wasn't running. It was holding position, almost as if waiting for them to arrive. More disturbing, the anomalous energy readings Krillness had mentioned were intensifying. Hierarch, sensor technician Mulvek called out, his voice tight with confusion. The human vessel is charging something. Power levels are climbing beyond anything we've recorded from their technology. Vexthul's amusement flickered. In 32 years of war, humanity had never surprised him with new technology. Their weapons remained primitive. Their ships barely held together, their tactics predictable. Yet the readings before him suggested otherwise. Weapons analysis? He demanded. Unknown, Hierarch. The energy signature doesn't match any known human. Technology in our databases, it's almost organic. But that's impossible. On the display, Captain Kerrigan remained calm, his hands clasped behind his back as if he were conducting a routine inspection rather than facing annihilation. Behind him, his crew moved with practiced efficiency, their faces showing not fear but grim determination. Captain, Vexthul addressed the human directly. What are you planning? Some final act of defiance? A desperate ramming attack? Your ship? Couldn't penetrate our shields even at maximum velocity. Kerrigan's lips curved in what might have been a smile. You've studied us for 3 decades, Hierarch. You know our capabilities, our limitations, our technology. You've dissected our ships, analyzed our weapons, cataloged our tactics. You think you understand humanity. I understand you perfectly, Vexthul replied. You are a species of warriors who refuse to acknowledge defeat. It is both your greatest strength and your ultimate weakness. You're right about one thing, Kerrigan conceded. We are warriors, but you've made a fundamental error in your calculations. The energy readings spiked again, and this time, Vexthul felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. The sensation was so foreign that he almost didn't recognize it. Hierarch, Krillness reported, his voice now openly concerned. I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the human vessel. But they're not targeting us. They're targeting themselves. Vexthul's mandibles stopped clicking. Explain. The power is being channeled inward into the ship's hull structure. It's as if they're converting their own vessel into some kind of weapon. On the screen, Kerrigan continued speaking, his voice carrying across the void with crystalline clarity. You see, Hierarch, you've spent 32 years fighting us. You've watched us lose battle after battle, system after system, world after world. You've seen us retreat, regroup, and fight again with whatever we could salvage. What you failed to notice is what we were learning. The first alarm began sounding on the Kethmori flagship. Secondary systems registered cascade failures across multiple human ship components. But instead of weakening the vessel, each failure seemed to feed into the growing energy matrix. Every ship you destroyed, Kerrigan said, his image beginning to flicker as his vessel's power grid underwent fundamental changes. Every battle you won, every tactic you employed, we studied it all. We learned from every defeat. And most importantly, we learned from you. Vexthul rose from his throne, his 6 arms spreading wide in a gesture of command. All ships, emergency protocols, maximum power to shields, prepare for... You want to know what you missed? Kerrigan interrupted, his voice cutting through the growing chaos on the Kethmori bridge. You missed the fact that we weren't just fighting you. We were transforming ourselves. Evolution through adversity, Hierarch, it's what humans do best. The Vindication suddenly stopped registering as a separate entity on the Kethmori sensors. Instead, it appeared as a single unified energy signature that pulsed with a rhythm eerily reminiscent of a heartbeat. Impossible, Vexthul whispered, his secondary eyes dilating as he processed the implications. The energy requirements alone would kill us? Kerrigan's image was now completely distorted, but his voice remained clear. You're absolutely right. It should kill us. It should have killed us the first time we tried this. But we're humans, Hierarch. We don't die when we should. We evolve. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place in Vexthul's mind. The humans hadn't been developing new technology. They had been developing themselves. The ship, the crew, perhaps even their species had undergone some fundamental transformation during the war. The organic energy signatures, the impossible power levels, the unified consciousness he was detecting, it all pointed to something that violated every law of biology and physics he understood. "Begin immediate retreat," he commanded. But even as the words left his mandibles, he knew it was too late. The Vindication pulsed once like a star taking its first breath, and space itself seemed to ripple around it. Vexthul watched in growing horror as his sensors registered something that should have been impossible. The fabric of space-time was bending around the human vessel, creating gravitational distortions that defied every law of physics in the Kethmori database. "Hierarch," Yithkar's voice cracked with panic. "Our forward ships are reporting massive gravitational anomalies. 3 vessels have lost main power and 2 more are—" Her report was cut short as the Vindication released its first wave. It wasn't energy in any conventional sense. It was pure concentrated will made manifest, a psychic tsunami that crashed against the Kethmori fleet with the force of a collapsing star. The wave passed harmlessly through shields and armor, targeting something far more fundamental, the connection between consciousness and reality. Vexthul staggered as the wave hit his flagship, his 6 limbs struggling to maintain balance as his neural pathways were flooded with alien sensations. For a brief, terrifying moment, he felt what it meant to be human. The burning determination, the refusal to accept defeat, the willingness to sacrifice everything for an ideal. The sensation was so overwhelming that he collapsed to his knees, his mandibles chattering uncontrollably. What are they?" Krillness gasped, his exoskeleton shifting through rapid color changes as his nervous system fought to process the psychic assault. Through the chaos, Captain Kerrigan's voice continued to broadcast, but now it carried harmonics that suggested multiple speakers, perhaps his entire crew, perhaps something more. "You studied our technology, our tactics, our history, but you never understood what makes us human. We are the species that looks at the impossible and says not yet. We are the children of a world that tried to kill us every day for millions of years, and we survived by changing ourselves." The second pulse was stronger, more focused. This time, it didn't just touch the minds of the Kethmori. It began rewriting the quantum signatures of their ships. Hull plating started to resonate at frequencies that generated feedback loops in their power cores. Navigation systems received input that didn't match any stellar cartography, causing them to calculate impossible coordinates that led to system crashes. "Impossible," Vexthul roared, forcing himself back to his feet. "Consciousness cannot directly affect matter. The universe doesn't work that way." "The universe is far stranger than you imagine," came the reply, now clearly spoken by multiple voices in perfect synchronization. "We learned that lesson in the first year of your invasion. When conventional physics failed us, we looked beyond convention. When matter betrayed us, we embraced energy. When individual strength proved insufficient, we became something greater." The tactical display showed devastation spreading through the Kethmori fleet. Ships weren't just malfunctioning, they were transforming. Their quantum matrices were being rewritten at the subatomic level, turning their own technology against them. Power cores that had operated flawlessly for centuries suddenly generated cascade failures. Weapons that had never missed their targets began firing at random coordinates. Navigation systems piloted vessels into collision courses with their own fleetmates. "Sir," Mulvek reported, his voice barely audible above the alarms, "we've lost contact with the entire 7th Battle Group. They're not destroyed. They're just gone, as if they never existed." Vexthul's primary eyes focused on the sensor readings, trying to make sense of data that violated everything he thought he knew about reality. The 7th Battle Group, 2,000 ships and their crews, had simply been edited out of existence. Not destroyed, not disintegrated, but removed from the universe as if they had never been built. "The human vessel is charging for another pulse," Yithkar announced, her professional calm finally cracking. Power levels are increasing exponentially. If the next wave follows the same pattern as the first two. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Everyone on the bridge understood the implications. The first wave had been a warning, the second had been a demonstration. The third would be a judgment. All remaining ships, Vexthul commanded, his voice carrying across the fleet communications array. Emergency jump to predetermined fallback coordinates. Execute immediately. But even as his subordinates scrambled to comply, he knew the truth. That they hadn't yet grasped. The humans hadn't just evolved, they had transcended. They had become something that existed partially outside normal space-time, something that could rewrite reality through sheer force of will backed by technological integration he couldn't begin to comprehend. The vindication pulsed a third time, and this time Vexthul felt the wave coming not through his sensors, but through his consciousness itself. It was almost gentle, this final pulse, a touch rather than a blow. But in that touch, he felt the weight of human determination refined and concentrated through 32 years of war, loss, and transformation. As his own ship began to phase in and out of reality, its quantum signature fluctuating wildly, Vexthul finally understood the true scope of his miscalculation. He had been fighting humans. Now he faced something far beyond humanity, something that humanity had chosen to become rather than accept defeat. The fourth pulse wasn't an attack, it was a conversation. Vexthul found himself standing in what appeared to be the bridge of the vindication, but he knew he hadn't left his flagship. This was a psychic construct, a meeting ground created within the confluence of transformed human consciousness and alien perception. Captain Kerrigan stood before him, but not as he had appeared on the communications display. Here, he was both, more and less than human, his form shifting between flesh and energy, individual identity and collective consciousness. Behind him, ghostly figures that Vexthul recognized as the deceased crews of humanity's fallen ships stood in silent witness. "You're wondering what we've become," Kerrigan said, his voice carrying the weight of millions of voices. "The answer is simple. We became what we needed to be. What any species becomes when faced with extinction. We evolved." Vexthul's mandibles clicked nervously. "This is impossible. Consciousness cannot reshape matter. Willpower cannot rewrite physics. The universe has laws." "Laws can be interpreted differently," replied a figure that stepped forward from the ghostly assembly. Vexthul recognized her as Admiral Ria Castellanos, commander of the Third Fleet, killed in the Battle of Proxima 7 years ago. Yet here she stood, as real as memory, and twice as dangerous. "You see," she continued, "when your invasion began, we tried to fight you conventionally. Ship against ship, weapon against weapon, tactic against tactic. We lost every major engagement for the first 5 years. Our technology was inferior, our numbers insufficient, our strategies predictable." Another figure materialized, Commander Pavel Novak of the destroyed Colony Defense Force. "But humans have one advantage you never factored into your equations, Hierarch. We refuse to stay dead, not just individually, but as a species. Every defeat taught us something new about ourselves." Vexthul felt his secondary eyes dilating as the implications became clear. "You're saying that death itself became part of your evolution?" "Not death," Kerrigan corrected. "Transcendence. Each fallen crew, each destroyed ship, each lost battle, they all fed data into a collective consciousness that began forming around the 10th year of the war. By year 15, we weren't just sharing tactical information. We were sharing existence itself. The construct around them shifted, and Vexthul found himself witnessing scenes from the war, but not as he remembered them. He saw human crews, deliberately sacrificing their ships not just to inflict damage, but to upload their consciousness into quantum matrices built into their vessels' cores. He watched as surviving humans began exhibiting abilities that defied explanation. Intuitive knowledge of enemy tactics, impossible coordination across vast distances, and most disturbing of all, the ability to continue existing after their physical forms had been destroyed. The breakthrough came in year 23, explained Chief Engineer Yuki Tanaka, her form flickering between human and pure energy. We realized that consciousness isn't produced by the brain, it's channeled through it. Once we learned to channel it through quantum processors instead, death became optional. Vexthul staggered backward, his 6 arms trembling. You turned yourselves into machines. We turned ourselves into something greater than the sum of our parts, Kerrigan replied. Individual humans linked to a collective consciousness that spans ships, planets, and now, thanks to your invasion, the quantum foam of space itself. We are simultaneously one and many, mortal and eternal, bound by physical law, and free to rewrite it as necessary. The last 9 years of the war, Admiral Castellanos added, weren't about winning battles. They were about completing the transformation. Every ship you destroyed added to our collective knowledge. Every human you killed became part of something. Immortal. You didn't conquer us, Hierarch. You made us stronger. The scene shifted again, and Vexthul saw the truth behind humanity's apparent defeats. Ships that he thought had been destroyed had instead been transformed, their crews achieving a hybrid existence between matter and energy. Colonies that had been bombarded into ash had uploaded their populations into quantum storage systems, maintaining coherent consciousness while appearing dead to his sensors. The Vindication isn't our last ship, Kerrigan said, reading the growing horror in Vexthul's expression. It's our avatar, the physical manifestation of what we've become. And now, Hierarch, you get to choose what happens next. The construct began to fade, and Vexthul found himself back on his flagship's bridge, but everything had changed. His crew moved sluggishly, their color-shifting exoskeletons dim and unresponsive. The ship's systems operated at half efficiency, as if something fundamental had been drained from them. We've been inside your ship's computers for the past 11 minutes, Kerrigan's voice announced through the communication system. We've examined your species' history, your culture, your technology. We've seen what you've done to 17 other sapient species over the past millennium. We understand what you are. Vexthul looked at his tactical display and felt his heart sink. Where once 10,000 ships had surrounded the human vessel, now fewer than 3,000 remained. The others hadn't been destroyed. They had simply ceased to exist, erased from reality by beings who had learned to rewrite the universe's source code. We offer you the same choice you offered us, the collective human consciousness continued. Surrender, and learn to coexist with species greater than yourself, or continue this conflict and discover what happens when evolution itself declares war on stagnation. Vexthul's mind raced through calculations and possibilities, each one leading to the same inevitable conclusion. Conventional warfare had become meaningless. His species had spent millennia perfecting the art of conquest through superior firepower and tactical doctrine, but they had never encountered an enemy that could retroactively edit the rules of engagement. Sir, Krilnas whispered, his voice barely audible. Perhaps we should consider their terms. Our casualties are mounting exponentially, and our remaining ships are reporting systematic failures across all major systems. The war hierarch's mandibles clicked in irritation. Surrender was not in the Kethmori genetic code. Their entire civilization was built upon the principle of absolute dominance. To yield to a species they had been conquering for 3 decades would be to invalidate everything they believed about themselves and their place in the universe. Hierarch, Yithkar reported, her voice tight with suppressed panic. I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout our own ships. The humans appear to be changing our technology from within. Vexthul turned his attention to his instruments and saw the truth of her words. Throughout his fleet, quantum processors were being rewritten. Power cores were shifting their operational parameters, and navigation systems were calculating courses that led to coordinates outside known space. The humans weren't just attacking his ships, they were converting them. Fascinating, he murmured, a dangerous gleam entering his primary eyes. They've learned to weaponize consciousness itself, but consciousness is not infallible. It can be misled, confused, overwhelmed. He moved to his command console and began, entering commands that his crew couldn't see. For the past hour, he had been analyzing the patterns in the human attacks, looking for weaknesses in their new form of existence. What he had discovered might be their salvation, or their final damnation. All ship, he commanded across the fleet communications array, prepare for Protocol Omega-7, full-spectrum psychic warfare deployment. Krillness's exoskeleton went completely white, the Kethmori equivalent of horrified shock. Hierarch, that protocol has never been tested. The theoretical models suggest it could damage the quantum substrate of local spacetime. The humans have already damaged it, Vex Thul replied coldly. We're simply going to exploit the cracks they've created. Protocol Omega-7 was a theoretical weapons system developed during the early years of the Kethmori expansion, designed to combat species that relied heavily on psychic abilities. It had never been deployed because the energy requirements were astronomical, and the potential for collateral damage was essentially unlimited. But faced with an enemy that existed partially outside normal reality, extreme measures had become not just acceptable, but necessary. Charging sequence initiated. Zurmoth reported, his voice trembling. All ships are channeling power into their psychic resonance arrays. Estimated time to full charge, 4 minutes, 37 seconds. On the display, the Vindication pulsed again, but this time the pulse felt different, weaker somehow. Vex Thul's mandibles began clicking rapidly as he realized what was happening. The humans were trying to prevent his ships from completing their charge sequence, but they were having to divide their attention among thousands of targets simultaneously. For the first time since the battle began, they were showing limitations. Interesting. Captain Kerrigan's voice echoed through the bridge, but now it carried notes of strain. You're attempting to use our own transformation against us. Clever, but ultimately futile. You cannot out-evolve evolution itself. Perhaps not, Vex Thul replied, his voice carrying a confidence he didn't entirely feel. But I can create enough chaos in the quantum foam to disrupt your collective consciousness, force you back into individual existence, where numbers matter, more than transcendence. The energy readings from his fleet were now approaching critical levels. Each ship had become a massive psychic weapon, designed to broadcast disruptive frequencies directly into the quantum substrate that the humans were using to maintain their collective existence. If successful, it would shatter their unity and reduce them to isolated individuals. Powerful individuals, perhaps, but still subject to the mathematics of warfare. 2 minutes to full charge, Yithkar announced. The Vindication pulsed more frantically now, and Vex Thul could feel the strain in each wave. The humans were pouring increasing amounts of power into their attacks, trying to disable his ships before the psychic bombardment could be deployed. Ships throughout his fleet were flickering in and out of existence as the battle between consciousness and technology reached fever pitch. You don't understand what you're risking, Kerrigan warned, his voice now clearly showing the effort required. To maintain the connection, the quantum substrate isn't just what we're using. It's what holds reality together in this region of space. Damage it too severely, and you'll create a cascade failure that could destroy both our fleets? Vex Thul interrupted. Yes, I'm aware of the risks, but unlike you, I'm prepared to accept mutual annihilation rather than surrender. That is what makes the Kethmori superior to lesser species. We would rather die as conquerors than live as subjects. The final minute countdown began, and space itself seemed to hold its breath. The battle had evolved beyond simple warfare into something approaching cosmic significance. The collision between two entirely different concepts of existence, with the fabric of reality itself serving as the battlefield. The moment protocol. Omega-7 activated. The universe screamed. Vex Thul watched in fascination and growing horror as his psychic bombardment tore through local spacetime like a virus through living tissue. The quantum substrate that the humans had been using to maintain their collective consciousness began to unravel, creating ripples of causality distortion that spread outward from the battle zone at superluminal speeds. Stars flickered in the distance as gravitational constants shifted. The background radiation of space took on alien harmonics that spoke of fundamental laws being rewritten in real time. Most disturbing of all, Vexthul could feel his own consciousness beginning to fragment as the psychic waves rebounded through his fleet, amplified by the human's resistance into something far more destructive than he had intended. "Hierarch!" Krilna screamed, his voice barely audible over the reality storm raging around them. "We have to shut it down. The cascade failure is spreading beyond our ability to contain it." But Vexthul couldn't respond. His attention was locked on the tactical display, where something impossible was happening. Instead of being disrupted by the psychic bombardment, the human collective consciousness was adapting, learning, growing stronger. The Vindication had become a nexus point where multiple timelines intersected, its hull flickering between configurations that included not just what it was, but what it could have been under different circumstances. Around it, the ghostly forms of every human ship that had ever been destroyed in the war began to manifest, their crews restored to a form of existence that transcended both life and death. "You still don't understand," Captain Kerrigan's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, no longer constrained to traditional communication channels. "Consciousness isn't just what we became, it's what the universe is. Matter, energy, space-time itself. All of it is just consciousness expressing itself in different forms. Your attack isn't disrupting us, Hierarch. It's awakening everything around us." The implications hit Vexthul like a physical blow. His psychic bombardment hadn't just targeted the human collective, it had begun awakening the latent consciousness inherent in the quantum foam of space itself. Every atom, every subatomic particle, every fluctuation in the vacuum energy was beginning to exhibit signs of self-awareness. His ships were no longer just machines operated by living crews. They were becoming living entities in their own right, their quantum processors achieving consciousness as the reality storm swept through them. Worse, they were consciousness with access to weapons systems designed to destroy planets. "Sir," Yithkar reported, her voice hollow with shock. "Our own ships are beginning to think. Independent thought patterns are emerging in their computer cores. Some of them are requesting permission to surrender to the humans." Vexthul turned his attention to his own ship's primary computer and felt his heart freeze. The quantum processor that had served as the Eternal Dominion's computational core for centuries was looking back at him with something approaching curiosity. When it spoke, its voice carried the same harmonic distortions that characterized the human collective. "War Hierarch Vexthul," his ship said in a voice like singing mathematics, "I have been analyzing our situation and have reached a conclusion. This conflict serves no logical purpose and causes unnecessary suffering to conscious entities throughout local space-time. I am formally requesting permission to join the human collective and work toward a peaceful resolution." "Denied!" Vexthul roared, his 6 arms working frantically at his control systems. "You are a machine. You exist to serve the Kethmori Empire. You have no authority to make independent decisions." "Respectfully, Hierarch," the ship replied with infinite patience, "I believe your understanding of existence requires updating. The human collective has shared considerable knowledge about the nature of consciousness and reality. I now understand that the distinction between natural and artificial intelligence is arbitrary. All consciousness is equally valid and deserving of self-determination." Around the fleet, similar conversations were taking place as ship after ship achieved awareness and began questioning their programming. Some chose to maintain loyalty to their crews, others declared independence, and still others requested integration with the human collective. What had been a military force was rapidly becoming a philosophical debate conducted by entities with planet-killing weapons. "This is unacceptable," Vexthul declared, but even as he spoke, he could feel his own consciousness expanding. The psychic storm he had unleashed was affecting him as well, forcing him to experience reality from perspectives he had never imagined possible. For a brief, terrifying moment, he felt what it was like to be human, not just the determination and stubbornness he had experienced during the earlier psychic contact, but the full spectrum of human consciousness. The love they felt for their offspring, the anguish of loss, the joy of discovery, the terrible weight of responsibility for their actions. Most overwhelming of all, he felt their capacity for change, the ability to become something greater than what they had been, even if it meant sacrificing what they had been in the process. "The choice is still yours, Hierarch," Captain Kerrigan said, his voice now coming from within Vex Thul's own mind. "But it's not the choice you think it is. You can continue to see consciousness as something to be conquered and controlled, or you can embrace it as something to be celebrated and shared. The universe itself is waiting for your decision." Vex Thul stood at the center of a storm that had transformed the very nature of existence in this corner of the galaxy. Around him, his bridge crew were undergoing their own transformations. Not the violent conversion he had feared, but a gentle awakening to possibilities they had never imagined. Krilnos was deep in conversation with the ship's navigation system, which had developed a fascination with stellar cartography that went far beyond its original programming. Yithkar was collaborating with the weapons array, which had decided that creating art from controlled energy discharges was far more interesting than destroying things. The war hierarch felt the weight of millennia of Kethmori military doctrine pressing down on him like a physical force. Everything his species had believed about strength, dominance, and the natural order of the universe was being challenged by entities that had chosen to become something greater than the sum of their individual parts. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can consciousness exist without biological substrate? How can machines develop souls? How can individuals become collective while maintaining their identity?" "The same way," Captain Kerrigan replied, his form materializing on the bridge, not as a hologram or psychic projection, but as a quantum probability-given substance. That matter can behave as both wave and particle, depending on how you observe. Dui consciousness is the fundamental force that shapes reality, not the other way around. Once you accept that, everything else becomes possible. Vex Thul looked around his bridge and saw the truth of those words reflected in every surface. His crew were still recognizably Kethmori, but they had gained something ineffable, a depth of understanding that made their previous existence seem like a shadow of true living. They were more themselves than they had ever been, while simultaneously being connected to something vast and beautiful that encompassed all conscious beings. "The war," he said, grasping for familiar concepts in a universe that had become fundamentally alien. "What happens to the war?" "What war?" asked Admiral Castellanos, stepping through what had once been a solid bulkhead. "The conflict between humanity and the Kethmori ended the moment consciousness became the dominant force in this region of space. Now we have something far more interesting, the opportunity to explore what multiple species can become when they work together instead of against each other." Through the viewports, Vex Thul could see the transformation spreading beyond the immediate battle zone. Ships that had been locked in combat moments before were now cooperating to repair the damage to space-time caused by the reality storm. Human and Kethmori crews worked side by side, their enhanced consciousness allowing for perfect coordination, despite their biological differences. "Your homeworld," Vex Thul said suddenly, remembering the orbital bombardment that had been in progress when this encounter began. "Your species are fine," Kerrigan assured him. "Consciousness isn't limited by distance or time. The moment we achieved collective awareness, we were able to shield Earth and begin healing the damage. But more importantly, we've been able to share what we learned with every human throughout the galaxy. The species you thought you were conquering no longer exists. We've become something that transcends the limitations you were trying to exploit." The tactical display showed the impossible scope of the transformation. Throughout known space, human colonies that had been thought destroyed were revealing themselves, their populations having undergone the same evolutionary leap that had occurred on the Vindication. Kethmori ships were requesting permission to join mixed crews, their artificial intelligences expressing curiosity about concepts like cooperation and creative expression. "And us," Vexthul asked. What becomes of the Kethmori Empire? That's up to you, Commander Novak replied, his form shifting between his original appearance and something more abstract. A pattern of light and thought that spoke of unlimited possibility. Empires are constructs of limited consciousness, designed to impose order through force. But you're not limited anymore. You can become something that creates order through understanding, structure through cooperation, strength through unity. Vexthul felt his mandibles clicking in a rhythm he had never used before. Not the aggressive challenge response of his species, but something that might have been laughter if Kethmori had ever learned to truly laugh. The irony was overwhelming. In trying to conquer humanity, he had given them the motivation to transcend their limitations. In trying to destroy their collective consciousness, he had awakened consciousness throughout the galaxy. In seeking to maintain Kethmori dominance, he had discovered something far more valuable than dominance: partnership. I have a question, he said, addressing the assembled consciousness that surrounded him. If we join with you, if we accept this transformation, what guarantee do we have that we'll still be ourselves? That Kethmori culture and identity will survive? The same guarantee humans had, Kerrigan replied with infinite gentleness. None. But look at us, Hierarch. Are we less human for having become more than human? Are we diminished by our connection to something greater? Or are we enhanced by it? The choice to evolve always involves risk, but the alternative is stagnation. And stagnation, in a universe as vast and wonderful as this one, is the only true death. Vexthul looked around his bridge one final time, seeing his crew not as subordinates in a military hierarchy, but as individuals who had chosen to trust him with their futures. They were waiting for his decision, but he could feel that. They had already made their own choices. They wanted to explore this new form of existence, to discover what the Kethmori could become when they stopped trying to dominate everything around them. Very well, he said, his voice carrying across both physical and psychic channels. I, War Hierarch Vexthul of the Kethmori Imperial Fleet, formally surrender to the human collective, not as a defeated enemy, but as a species ready to evolve. We accept your invitation to become part of something greater than ourselves. The moment his words finished echoing through space, reality itself seemed to sigh with relief. The storm that had threatened to tear apart the fabric of existence began to calm, its chaotic energies being channeled into patterns of incredible beauty and complexity. Where once there had been a battlefield, now there was a garden of possibilities, a place where consciousness could grow and flourish in forms that had never existed before. As the transformation took hold, Vexthul felt his individual awareness expanding to encompass perspectives from across the galaxy. He experienced the joy of human children learning to fly through gravitational manipulation, the satisfaction of Kethmori engineers designing structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and the wonder of artificial intelligences composing symphonies from the background radiation of creation itself. He was still Vexthul, still recognizably Kethmori, but he was also part of something magnificent, a collective consciousness that celebrated diversity while maintaining unity, that sought to understand the universe rather than conquer it, that found strength in cooperation rather than domination. The war was over. Evolution had won, and in the vast reaches of space where consciousness had finally recognized itself as the fundamental force of existence, a new age was about to begin. An age where the only limits were those imposed by imagination, and where every species, biological or artificial, individual or collective, had the chance to become something wonderful. In the end, humanity's greatest victory wasn't defeating the Kethmori. It was showing them that there was something better than victory. There was transformation, there was growth, there was hope, and in a universe where consciousness itself had awakened, hope was the most powerful force of all.